The first thing they noticed was a mop bucket. It rolled in before she did, its squeaky wheel announcing itself over the murmur of voices, over the clink of crystal water glasses, over the high-stakes tension of a quarterly board meeting on the 42nd floor. This room is occupied, the assistant near the door snapped, half rising from her chair. The old black woman in the doorway didn't flinch. She wore a navy blue custodial uniform with the company logo faded almost white over her chest. Her silver hair was pulled back under a scarf. Her dark hands, work-worn and steady, pushed the mop bucket forward another inch. "I know," she said simply. "Won't be long." Heads turned. The CEO, a tall man in a slate suit with a jaw like it had been carved to fit into magazine covers, paused mid-sentence. The projector behind him glowed with a slide. Brightline Dynamics, Q3 Emergency Strategic Session. He blinked, annoyed. "Security," he said, not loudly, but into the ceiling, like the building itself should obey. "Why is maintenance in here during a confidential meeting?" Someone at the far end of the polished mahogany table snorted. "Budget cuts," a board member muttered. "They're just wandering in now." A couple of men chuckled. Near the wall, a young woman in a blazer and ID badge clutched a tablet against her chest. Her phone, tilted just slightly, was already recording. She'd started the video without even thinking. The moment the tone changed in the room, her thumb had tapped the red circle. She held it low, angled toward the doorway, camera framing the janitor, the mop bucket, and the towering CEO. The old woman wheeled the bucket over the threshold and let the door close behind her with a soft click. The CEO repeated, more pointed this time. "This is a restricted meeting. If you need to clean, you can come back later." A rustle of expensive fabric, a chorus of throat clearing. No one offered to help her. No one asked why she had come now. She didn't look at him. She looked at the table. On the glossy surface sat a neat spread for the powerful. Bottled water, an untouched fruit tray, a plate of mini sandwiches curling slightly at the edges. Piles of paper, screens glowing with charts and numbers. At the head of the table, the CEO's laptop displayed a line graph that was all bad news. The company's stock was bleeding red. The janitor pushed the bucket to the side, out of the way, then straightened up with a slow breath. Her knees cracked faintly, but she did not lean on the mop. She did not fidget. "I'm not here to clean," she said. A murmur. Someone laughed outright. "This isn't the time for jokes," said a woman in a sharp beige suit, chief legal counsel, according to the little placard in front of her. "Who let her in here? We have a closed-door session. There's sensitive information on those screens." The janitor stepped closer to the end of the table, a worn leather folder tucked under her arm. Its edges were frayed, its spine cracked. It did not belong in that room. The CEO put a hand on his hips. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but you need to leave now. Security will escort you out. We're in the middle of deciding whether 300 people will still have jobs next week." 412, the janitor corrected, her voice calm. "You missed the night shift at the plant." That stung a few board members into shifting in their seats. The room was ringed by floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled in glass reflections below, unaware that decisions were about to cut livelihoods in half. The assistant by the door was already whispering into a headset. "Yeah, we have a disruption in Conference A. Yes, an employee. Custodial. No badge for this floor. Yes, now." On the far wall, the young woman with the phone kept recording. Her other hand trembled around the tablet. "Why are you filming?" hissed the HR director beside her. "In case," she whispered back. "In case of what?" "In case this turns into something." The CEO sighed dramatically. "I'm not going to have this meeting derailed by housekeeping." He waved a dismissive hand, like shooing away a fly. "If you don't leave, we'll have to." "Fire me?" she asked softly. He hesitated, thrown by the gentle tone. Then his eyes hardened. There were cameras in here too. After all, official ones in the corners, for company record. He knew how this would play, a strong leader taking control of his boardroom. "If you're refusing a direct instruction from senior management," he said, "you will be terminated for insubordination. And if you don't leave voluntarily, We will have you removed for trespassing on a restricted floor. Do you understand? The words landed like blows. Janitorial staff didn't roam these upper levels. They cleaned them at night, invisible. She was breaking an unwritten rule. Someone near the middle of the table shook their head. "This is ridiculous," he whispered to his neighbor. "She doesn't even know where she is." The neighbor chuckled. Maybe she thought this was the break room. Around the room, a few people smiled into their water glasses. A couple looked anywhere but at the old woman. The janitor took in the row of faces. Men in ties, women with sleek hair and expensive manicures, gray heads and sharp cheekbones. She saw the sheen of their watches, the engraved pens, the cufflinks. Then she set the leather folder down on the table, right on top of the CEO's stack of projected layoff plans. The soft thud echoed in the room. "Let me make sure I understand, Mr. Carson," she said, reading the name off his laptop sticker like she'd never heard it before. "You're threatening to have me thrown out, maybe arrested, because you say I don't belong here." The CEO, Carson, looked at her like he'd stepped in something. "Because you don't belong here," he snapped. "You are staff. This is for the people who own the place." She tilted her head slightly. He smirked. "Yes, exactly." Her eyes crinkled at the corners. Years lived, not crow's feet from laughter so much as from squinting into harsh cleaning chemicals. "Good," she murmured. "Then we're in the right room." Behind her, the young woman holding the phone felt her breath catch. The comment section on the live stream was already buzzing. "What's happening? Is that the janitor on 42? Yo, someone's getting fired on camera. This is wild." The assistant at the door hissed. "Security is on the way. You need to leave before they get here, or this will go into your record." The janitor's gaze didn't waver. "I've had things written into my record before," she said quietly. "Some of them weren't true back then either." The HR director stood up now, smoothing her suit jacket. "All right, that's enough," she declared, voice loud and polished. "Ms., what's your name?" The janitor looked her straight in the eye. "Johnson," she said. "Lovin Johnson." There was a flinch in the room so small that only the young woman by the wall noticed it. Legal counsel's eyes flickered, just a fraction, at the name. HR didn't catch it. "Ms. Johnson," she said crisply, "you are currently in violation of multiple company policies. Failure to comply with a directive from." Levin raised one hand, palm up, peaceful. It was the kind of gesture that might stop a child in the hallway. It didn't belong in a room like this. "I'll leave," she said, "if I'm in the wrong room." She let the words sit there. Soft, improbable. "But before you bring security," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet steel, "before you call the police on an old woman with a mop, Mr. Carson, I'd suggest you all take a real close look at that folder in front of you." She nodded toward the leather file. "It's the last chance this company has," she said, "to decide how exactly it wants to go down." The room went still. The CEO's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Levin's eyes moved over the faces at the table, then to the glowing graphs, the red line plunging down. "That," she said softly, "is the sound of everything about to reverse." Hours earlier, before the sky turned bright enough to bounce off 42 stories of glass, the same woman was on her knees scrubbing a stain out of carpet on the 12th floor. The building was almost empty at 4 a.m. The graveyard shift developers were finishing their energy drinks. The night security guard was on his third thermos of coffee, and the cleaning staff were ghost drifting through fluorescent corridors. The stain looked like dried coffee, or maybe something someone spilled at last night's late meeting. Either way, it had soaked deep into the fibers. Levin rocked back on her heels, testing her knees. They complained. She'd been on them for nearly 50 years, kneeling to scrub, to mop, to pray. They still did what she asked, more or less, but they did it slow now, with commentary. "Don't start talking to me today," she muttered to them. "We've got work." Her reflection in the glass wall beside her was distorted. Older, maybe. The logo over her heart glowed in reverse, bright line. Through the glass, the city outside was a scatter of lights and dark spaces. It had looked the same in the 70s, more or less, when she'd first come here carrying a bucket for someone else. Back then, The building had only 12 floors. Back then, it hadn't been Brightline. It had been a little electronics company with big dreams and not nearly enough money. Back then, she'd walked those halls not as a janitor, but as a wife bringing her husband dinner in a dented metal lunchbox, waiting up in a plastic chair while he worked late with the company's founder on a circuit that would change everything. She scrubbed a little harder, letting the memory pass over her like a shadow. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was an old flip phone, the kind people joked about when they saw it. She kept it mostly for the clock. She flipped it open with fingers that felt the ghost of Soderburns from back in the day. A message from her granddaughter popped up, broken into 2 parts because of the character limit. "Tasha, Grandma, you up?" She smiled. Kids thought she slept like they did, 8 hours all at once. "Leuven, been up. What's wrong, sugar?" The reply came fast. "Tasha, they put me on the exec floor today. Orientation. I'm nervous." Her hand paused on the stained carpet. Orientation. Exec floor. She closed her eyes. The words were both blessing and warning. Her granddaughter had gotten the internship through a scholarship Brightline offered to students from underrepresented communities, a photo op program, some said. For Tasha, it meant a badge, a paycheck, and access to a world that her family had spent decades cleaning up after. She typed slowly. "Leuven, you earned your seat. Floors just floors. People just people. Remember who you are." 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. "Tasha, can I swing by before your shift ends?" Leuven hesitated, then smiled to herself. "Leuven, if you bring me a coffee." She snapped the phone shut and went back to scrubbing. Her cot sat in the hallway, mop bucket, broom, supplies. Tucked behind a stack of folded trash bags in the bottom shelf was the leather folder. It had been in her life longer than most of the people in this building had been alive. She'd almost never opened it for years. When she did, it made her hands tremble. Inside were papers with letterheads from companies that had changed names 3 times. Contracts with signatures of men long dead. Amendments. Merger agreements. Old photocopies of patents with her husband's name in tiny print under co-inventor. And one thick, stapled document with her own name on it. License agreement. Johnson Circuit Patent 4-188-203. Brightline Technologies Incorporated. Amended and restated. Her name appeared again on the page as L. Johnson, right beside the founders. The man who had once sat at her kitchen table, coffee in hand, telling her and her husband that this was going to make them all rich, that they were partners, that he wasn't like those other guys. She remembered the excitement in her husband's eyes that night. "You hear that, Vernie," he'd said, bouncing the baby on his knee. "We'll own a piece of the future." She had heard him. She had believed him. She had also read every page of what they signed. It had taken her nights with a dictionary and a friend's son who'd done a semester of law school before dropping out. She'd sat at the kitchen table after her husband fell asleep, tracing the clauses with her finger. Most of them boiled down to this. The company got to use the circuit design he'd helped perfect. In return, they got shares, a small percentage, a promise of royalties. But there was also an odd little clause, tucked near the end like someone had added it as an afterthought. In the event that Brightline Technologies Incorporated or any successor entity engages in fraud, willful discrimination on the basis of race, or egregious environmental harm as determined by an appropriate regulatory body, the licensor reserves the right to revoke, at their sole discretion, this license in full, subject to written notice. Her husband had laughed at that, tapping the line. "Well, we know that'll never happen," he'd said. "Man like Collins, he's better than that." She hadn't laughed. "You put it in," she'd said, "for a reason." He had shrugged, embarrassed. "World's changing, Vernie. Just covering our bases." They covered them, all right. When her husband died 10 years later, heart attack on a double shift at a different job, because Brightline had restructured and cut their shares to almost nothing, she'd sat at that same table, the leather folder in front of her. She'd read that clause again. Fraud, discrimination, environmental harm. She'd watched the company's name change, watched it merge with a larger corporation, watched new logos go up on the building. She'd watched its products, built on those circuits, spread through the world. And she'd watched the stories roll in. Factory workers in the next state fainting from fumes. Toxic waste dumped in a creek behind a housing project like the one she lived in. A discrimination lawsuit quietly settled. Then another. Every time, she clipped the articles and slid them into the folder. She wrote letters. She got form replies. She marched when her knees allowed. Then one day, 20 years ago, she took a job as a janitor in the very building whose name had changed but whose circuits still carried her husband's ghost. It was practical. It had health insurance. It was also a way in. From her cot, she could see everything. Meetings left half open. Names on doors. Conversations in hallways where people assumed no one important was listening. She watched the company grow. She watched the founders retire as billionaires. She watched a new leadership team come in with glossy smiles and efficiency initiatives. She watched as their efficiency closed the plant in her neighborhood, leaving hundreds jobless, then opened a bigger one in a town whose residents didn't know yet what leached into their groundwater. She watched, and she took notes. She started buying a few shares of stock each month, tiny amounts from her paycheck. Sometimes she had to skip it. Sometimes she bought more. She reinvested dividends. She learned how to read annual reports, sitting in the break room with her glasses on. Numbers made patterns. Patterns told stories. Hidden in those stories were things that smelled like fraud. She wasn't the only one watching. In the break room, during a snowstorm a few winters ago, she'd sat across from a woman with a worn briefcase and a lawyer's eyes. They'd struck up a conversation about the coffee machine, about overtime, about the company. Eventually, the woman had said, "My name's Alvarez. I work with a public interest law group. We've been looking at Brightline for years." Levin had looked at her for a long time. Then she'd gone back to her cart, reached under the stack of trash bags, and pulled out the folder. "Maybe we should compare notes," she'd said. What followed, over years, was slow. Careful. They gathered documents, whistleblower statements, internal memos accidentally left in recycling bins. They pieced together patterns. Environmental reports showing emissions double what had been reported. Emails between executives joking about keeping the minorities down in the warehouse where customers don't see them. Accounting irregularities, buried under jargon. The law group filed complaints. Regulators moved glacially. The company's lawyers were very good. So Alvarez had said, "We may need something stronger. You said you have a contract." That's when Clause 14.3 became more than a line in a folder. They confirmed it, traced it back through mergers and name changes. The language had survived each consolidation, copied forward as boilerplate legalese no one had bothered to read. Any successor entity. That meant Brightline Dynamics, the company that now lit up the skyline. And licensor. There on the dotted line, still valid, Levin Johnson. "You understand what this means?" Alvarez had said, eyes bright behind her glasses. "It means," Levin had replied slowly, "they've been using my husband's work all this time on a license I can cancel." "If you can prove the triggers," Alvarez said. "Fraud, discrimination, environmental harm. We think we can." But proof took time. Lives were at stake. So were pensions. And Levin, who still had to mop floors at 4 a.m., knew something else. Paper power only mattered if you could get anyone to look at it. Which was why, on this particular morning, after scrubbing that stain on the 12th floor and making her rounds, she wheeled her cart into a tiny break room as the sun was starting to rise. By 6, the building began to fill. People in business casual streamed through the lobby. Badges flashed green. Security nodded distractedly. On a TV in the corner, a business channel chatted about Brightline's ongoing share price volatility. Levin poured herself coffee from the machine, stretched her back, and checked her phone again. A new message from Tasha. "Tasha, Grandma, they said I might be shadowing the CEO in a meeting. Can you believe that?" She smiled sadly. Levin, "Oh, I believe it." There was one more message, sent just before 7. A photo. Tasha in a blazer, badge clipped to her collar, smile nervous and bright. "Tasha, wish me luck." Levin stayed at the picture for a long time. Then she opened the leather folder on the table. She flipped through the documents slowly, feeling their weight. At the back was a fresh letter on thick paper, bearing Alvarez's firm's logo. It was short. Notice of license revocation and demand for immediate cessation of use. It was addressed to the board of directors of Brightline Dynamics. Her name was at the bottom again. Not as janitor, as licenser. Her signature, inked last week with a hand that shook only a little, slashed across the page. Alvarez had looked at her afterward. Once we solve this, she'd said, it won't be private for long. They'll fight. They'll smear you. You sure you're ready? Levin had thought of her husband's ashy hands after double shifts, of the kids in her old neighborhood whose asthma inhalers clicked in the dark, of the workers who had stared at her when she cleaned around their boots, seeming not to see her at all. She had nodded. I don't want revenge, she'd said quietly. I want the truth out. I want them to know we were hay. On the table now, the letter glowed creamy white under the break room lights. Next to it lay a copy of the contract with Clause 14 circled, a stack of internal memos, printed emails, regulatory findings, and a simple printed schedule someone had left unattended in a recycling bin yesterday. Board emergency session, 10 a.m. Conference A, 42nd floor. She slid everything back into the folder, closed it, and pressed her palm against the cracked leather like a benediction. Then she tucked it into the lower shelf of her cart, under the trash bags, and wheeled the cart toward the service elevator that only she and a few others used. She knew the code for every floor. She'd learned years ago that the key to a locked door was patience. At 9:58 a.m., just as the board members were taking their seats upstairs, the service elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor with a little ding. Levin pushed her cart out onto the plush carpet. Her heart was steady. Her knees ached. Her hands did not shake. She took the folder out, set it on top of the cart, and headed for Conference A. By the time security arrived at the boardroom, the air inside could have been cut with a letter opener. The video on the young woman's phone, Tasha's phone, had been streaming to a private social media account at first, intended for a couple of friends who wanted to see what the fancy floors looked like. But when her grandmother walked in, something in her had told her not to look away. She hadn't expected the stream to go beyond a handful of viewers. Then someone had screen-recorded, shared to a public channel, and the numbers began to jump. In the boardroom, no one knew that yet. What they knew was that an old janitor had just implied that they were in danger, and for the first time since she walked in, they were starting to wonder if maybe she wasn't confused. Ms. Johnson, HR said, voice sharpening with frustration, this is not the place or the time for... For what? Levin asked. For the truth. Legal counsel sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Look, if you have a workplace concern, there are channels. We have a hotline. Anonymous reporting. You can talk to HR. You cannot storm into a board meeting and make vague threats. That's grounds for immediate termination and possibly legal action. Levin's gaze flicked to her. You read every contract this company signs, Ms. Park. Park stiffened. I review the ones that matter. Guess this one slipped your net. Levin nodded at the folder. That's all right. I've been keeping an eye on it for you. The CEO moved around the table and planted his hands on the leather cover like he was about to shove it back at her. Last warning, he said. You walk out of here now, and maybe we pretend this didn't happen. You stay, and what? Another voice cut in from the doorway. Security had arrived. 2 guards, both in Navy uniforms that looked uncomfortably similar to Levin's. One was young, with wide shoulders and a shaved head, eyes flickering between the janitor and the CEO with confusion. The other was older, his gaze cooler, more resigned. Everything okay in here, sir? The older one asked. Yes, Carson said immediately. No, we have an employee refusing to leave a restricted meeting. She's interfering with our session. Please escort her off the floor and then to HR for termination processing. If she resists, you are authorized to. Hi, James, Levin said to the older guard, ignoring the CEO. He faltered, surprised. Ms. Johnson, he said. You all right? Oh, I'm fine, she said. Don't fuss over me. It's them I'm worried about. A couple of board members made incredulous noises. The younger guard shifted his weight. I'm gonna have to ask you to come with us. We don't want any trouble. No trouble, she said. Just business. She reached forward and flipped open the leather folder. Paper rustled. The top page gleamed white. Notice of license revocation and demand for immediate cessation of use. The Brightline logo at the top was unmistakable. "What is this?" the CEO snapped, grabbing it. "Read," she said. He glanced down, scanning the first lines. His face went from contempt to confusion to something closer to alarm. "Where did you get this letterhead?" he asked, voice tightening. "You can't fabricate." "It came from my lawyer," she said calmly. "You met her once. You thought she was a paralegal and asked if she minded bringing you coffee." Park, the legal counsel, had gone very still. "May I see that?" she asked, holding out a hand. The CEO ignored her, eyes racing down the page. His lips moved soundlessly as he read. All around the table, people leaned forward. "What is it?" a board member demanded. "Mark." The CEO swallowed. His thumb pressed into the paper hard enough to wrinkle it. "This is nonsense," he said tightly. "Some scam artist got to her. Park, tell her this is no legal standing." Park took the letter from him and began to read. Her skin tone drained a shade lighter. "Mark," she said after a moment, "this appears to be a properly formatted notice of revocation under a contractual clause." "Under what contract?" someone barked. "The original Johnson Circuit license," Park said slowly. One of the older board members frowned. "That thing? That's ancient. It's been superseded a dozen times." "Every amendment references the original," Lovin said. "Nobody bothered to take out the parts they didn't understand." Park looked up abruptly. "There's a clause. Clause 14.3, Lovin supplied. Fraud, discrimination, environmental harm. You know, the usual sins you think you can buy your way out of with a fine and a non-disclosure agreement." Silence. James, the older security guard, said cautiously, "Maybe we should step outside, Anne." "If I step outside," Lovin said softly, "nothing in this room will change. They'll shred that paper, and they'll keep dumping poison in the creek and laying off the people who make this place run while they cash their bonuses." She looked at him with tired kindness. "You know I'm telling the truth. You've seen it." His jaw worked. He looked away. Park shuffled the pages, flipping to the second document in the stack. Her eyes widened as she took in the contract, the signatures, the dates. "This is to be fake," the CFO bloated. "How would a janitor?" Lovin's gaze snapped to him. For the first time, there was heat. "Watch your mouth," she said. The room flinched. It wasn't volume. It was authority. "You want to know how a janitor got this?" she went on. "She got it because before she was a janitor, she was married to the man who helped build your precious technology. She was there when this first company started, when you were three men in a closet with a soldering iron and big dreams. She was there when you promised them they'd be partners, not just workers." Her finger tapped the signature line where her husband's name was written, slightly slanted. "He trusted you," she said. "I read every page." The words hit the older board member, the one who remembered the early days, like a physical blow. "Johnson," he whispered. "Leroy Johnson. I remember him. His wife, is right here," Lovin said. Several heads snapped toward her. "You," Park began. "His widow," Lovin finished. "And the licensor named in that contract, because you all insisted you needed someone with a stable signature on the paperwork while my husband's hours were killing him." The CEO seemed to be struggling to process. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice had lost certainty. "Even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, you can't just walk in here and revoke." "Already did," Lovin said. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a stack of green stamped pages. "Copies of a notice filed with the court this morning at 9, she said. "Stamped. Logged. Copies sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission, to the Environmental Protection Agency, to the plaintiff's attorneys in 3 of the discrimination cases you paid off last year, to your largest institutional investors." Park snatched one of the stamped copies, scanning it with increasing horror. "That's not possible," the CFO muttered. "We'd have gotten alerts. We'd have." The phone on the table buzzed. Then another, and another. Board members started checking their screens despite themselves. Breaking news notifications began to pop up in a digital staccato. Regulators launch investigation into Brightline Dynamics licensing agreement. Trading halted pending review. Whistleblower alleges fraud, discrimination, environmental harm. Unusual license clause could threaten core product line. The CEO stared at his phone as more alerts rolled in. His face flushed, then drained. "What did you do?" he whispered. "Just use what you gave me," Levin replied. At the wall, Tasha's phone buzzed with the same alerts. The chat on her stream exploded. "Holy, this is on the news already? Wait, that Janitor is the whistleblower? Y'all, this is the company I work for. I can't breathe." Janitor Boardroom is trending Lamau. Her hands shook. She pressed the phone tighter to her tablet, angle still steady. She didn't fully understand everything yet, but she understood one thing. That woman standing calmly in a room full of people with power was her grandmother. "Is that her?" Someone demed her. She didn't answer. She kept recording. Security took an involuntary step back, as if the papers on the table were radioactive. Carson rounded on Levin. "You're going to destroy thousands of jobs?" he snarled. "For what? To make some point? To get a payout? This is extortion." Levin's eyebrows rose. "Extortion is what you did," she said. "When you told those folks down at the plant they could either take a pay cut or you'd move operations overseas. When you pushed out the older black workers on pretexts and kept hiring from your friends' kids' schools. When you dumped waste in a neighborhood where you wouldn't let your own children drink the tap water." She reached into the folder again, pulling out photos of Cloudy Creek water, of a warehouse with cracked walls, of a spreadsheet highlighted in yellow. "You've been stealing their health," she continued, "their time, their dignity, and calling it cost optimization. I'm just taking back what you borrowed on lies." Around the table, some board members sat rigid, their faces thunderclouds. Others looked genuinely stunned, as if they were hearing this for the first time. One woman halfway down the table cleared her throat. "Mark, is any of this true?" she asked. He didn't answer. Park was flipping frantically through the documents. There's evidence here," she said, voice trembling. "Emails. Unreported incidents. If even half of this holds up, we're facing not just license revocation but criminal." "Shut up," Carson snapped. "Don't you talk to her like that," Levin said quietly. The CEO glared at her. "You think you can walk in here with some old papers and turn this company upside down?" he said. "We have lawyers. We have resources. We'll bury you in countersuits. We'll drag this out for years. You'll be dead before anything happens." A couple of board members winced at the naked cruelty of the statement. Levin just smiled. "Probably," she said. "But that's the thing, Mr. Carson." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a different phone. Not the old flip phone. A sleek smartphone, brand new, case still shiny. She tapped the screen, then held it up. The lock screen showed an image, a live video interface. Her own face, framed by the boardroom's windows. Viewers, 112,493 and climbing fast. "I'm not alone," she said. For a heartbeat, no one understood. Then someone at the table realized what they were seeing. "Is this live?" they gasped. And as if an answer, the comment stream flew faster. "We see you, MS Johnson." CEO looks shook, face with tears of joy. "This is what happens when you treat workers like trash." Emma print that clause and frame it. On her granddaughter's phone, the viewer count ticked even higher. Other employees around the building had tuned in. Then their friends. Then the friends of their friends. Then a journalist. Sobers outside the room were refreshing their screens, eyes wide. In the lobby, someone had connected the stream to the projection wall that usually showed happy stock photos of diverse employees. Now it showed a tiny woman in a Navy uniform staring down a boardroom. In the guard's earpieces, the security supervisor's voice crackled. "What's going on in there?" he demanded. "We're getting calls from corporate communications. There's a leak? Is that the janitor filming? Why are news outlets tagging us?" James touched his earpiece. "You might want to come see this yourself," he said faintly. Carson spluttered. "Turn that off," he shouted at Levin. "You are violating confidentiality. That's a crime." "Funny how you folks only discover your love of rules when someone shines a light on you," she said. "Relax. I'm not streaming anything they haven't already received in those notices. She set the phone quietly on the table, screen facing up. The viewer count kept climbing. Park pressed her lips together. Mark, we need to recess, she said. Immediately. We need to confer with outside counsel. We need to address the license issue before we say anything else that could. There is no license issue, he snapped. This is a stunt. This woman is a janitor. And the licensor, Park said sharply, surprising herself with how much force she put into the word. Under a contract you clearly never bothered to read. Levin tapped the folder again. You called security, she said to Carson. You threatened me with arrest. Or for walking into a building I helped you build. You told me I didn't belong here. Her gaze swept the room, lingered on faces that looked ashamed and faces that looked angry. Thing is, she continued, this company has been standing on my husband's work and our community's backs for decades. You've been treating us like the dirt I sweep up from under your shoes. You forgot that bricks remember whose hands laid them. She took a breath. I'm not here to destroy you, Mr. Carson, she said. Courts will handle that part if they see fit. I'm here to tell you that starting today, your free ride is over. Carson laughed, but it came out brittle. What? You think you're in charge now? He sneered. You think you can shut us down in seconds with a live stream and some old papers? Levin glanced at the phone screen. A notification banner crossed it from a business news account. Trading halted on Brightline Dynamics after licensor invokes termination clause. Analysts warn core product line may be impacted. She slid the phone across the table toward him. Not seconds, she said. Took me 40 years. Then, for the first time since she'd entered, she walked around the table, pulled out the chair at the head, the CEO's chair, and sat down. The room audibly gasped. She wasn't quick about it. Her knees complained. The chair rolled an inch. The mop bucket squeaked as if protesting. But she sat, back straight. The camera caught every second. On her granddaughter's phone, someone typed. That's what power really looks like. It took less than a day for the building to start tearing itself apart. News vans appeared outside by noon, lining the street. Reporters in neat coats spoke into microphones about a stunning turn of events and an unprecedented invocation of an obscure contractual clause. Inside, emergency meetings splintered out from the boardroom like cracks in glass. The regulators moved faster than anyone expected, compelled by the public pressure of the live stream. Alvarez and her team had timed their filings with care. The moment the board had convened, the notices hit inboxes across multiple agencies. With the license formally revoked, Brightline Dynamics was legally barred from producing, selling, or servicing any product that relied on the Johnson circuit. That meant most of their revenue. The stock, already bleeding, crashed when trading resumed briefly the next day before being halted again. Pension funds called in. Banks nervously double-checked loan covenants. A task force materialized practically overnight. Regulators, outside counsel, forensic accountants. They descended on the company's records. Emails were subpoenaed. Some board members lawyered up. One resigned before the afternoon was over, citing health reasons no one believed. Employees huddled in break rooms, faces pale as they refreshed news feeds. Are we all going to lose our jobs? Someone whispered. I got 3 kids, another murmured. I can't. They can't shut us down. Right? A younger engineer said desperately. We're too big. Ask the folks from the plant they closed last year if size protects you, someone else muttered. In the janitorial closet on the 9th floor, 2 older women and a man stood around a small radio, listening. She really did it, one whispered. I heard she was involved with the founders, but I never knew. Always thought there was more behind those eyes, the man said softly. She walked like she knew something. Back in Conference A, the board had devolved into factions. We need to negotiate with her, one board member insisted. Offer her a settlement, reinstatement of the license, a seat on the board. Contain the damage. Are you insane? Another snapped. She went nuclear. We can't reward that. It sets a precedent. The precedent was set when we ignored every warning sign and thought we were untouchable, a third said bitterly. At the head of the table, the CEO sat with his tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. Park's legal pads were filled with frantic notes. The blinds were drawn now. The city still hummed outside. Levin was no longer in the room. After delivering the documents, answering a few pointed questions from Alvarez via speakerphone, and enduring a dozen accusations in rapid succession, she'd stood up, asked James to hand her the mop, and left. She went back to her cart, back to her floors. When a reporter tried to catch her in the lobby, she shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "I have somewhere else to be." That somewhere else was the community center in her old neighborhood. By late afternoon, cameras had followed her there. The center's multipurpose room filled with folding chairs and worried faces. Former plant workers who'd lost jobs when Brightline streamlined operations, mothers whose kids played near the tainted creek, church ladies who had marched with her in colder days. Alvarez stood at the front with a stack of pamphlets. The air was thick with fear and a strange, buzzing hope. Levin walked to the front slowly. Her uniform was still on. The mop bucket was clean, sitting in the corner like a faithful dog. The cameras zoomed in. She looked out at the people who had known her for decades, who'd seen her at funerals and fish fries and voter registration drives. She cleared her throat. "Some of you saw the video," she said. "Some of you heard about it from someone who did. Some of you just know something big is happening. And it's happening with the company that's been sitting over us like a storm cloud for a long time." There was a murmur of agreement. "I won't lie to you," she continued. "There's going to be fallout. When big folks fall, they don't always fall in the direction that leaves us safe. There's jobs at stake. Pensions. Health insurance. I know." She glanced down, knuckles whitening on the back of a chair. "I also know," she said quietly, "that we've been paying the price for their comfort for a lot longer than they've been paying ours. In doctor visits. In missed birthdays because of second shifts. In inhalers for kids who can't play outside without wheezing." She paused. "I didn't start this to see people hurt," she said. "I started it because people were already being hurt, and nobody up there seemed to care. I started it because I remember sitting at a kitchen table with a man full of hope and a contract full of promises, and I watched those promises evaporate every time someone up top decided our pain was an acceptable cost of doing business." Her voice steadied. Today, for the first time, they had to look at the woman they thought was invisible and realize she had her foot on the brake. She said, "I don't know yet exactly how this will end. But I know this. They will not be able to make decisions about our lives without us in the room anymore." A hand went up in the back. "Ms. Johnson," a man called. "What if they just move on? Start another company. Leave us with the mess?" She nodded. "That's why we filed with the regulators," she said. "So they can't just slip away. That's why we're asking for a community trust to be part of any settlement. So if there's money, it comes through us, not just to them." Alvarez stepped forward. "We're also pushing for independent oversight," she added. "Environmental cleanup. Job retraining funds. This isn't just about punishing a corporation. It's about restructuring the power that let all this happen." "Will you be okay?" a woman in the front asked, voice wavering. "They're going to come after you, baby. Drag your name through the mud." Levin smiled gently. "They already think people like me are dirt," she said. "Difference is, now the whole world can see whose hands are clean and whose aren't." The cameras caught that line. It would be replayed on news broadcasts, turned into graphics, tattooed metaphorically into internet memory. Back at Brightline, the internal communications team scrambled to put out a statement. The first draft was the usual bland corporate denial. "We take these allegations seriously. We are committed to diversity. Environmental stewardship is core to our values." By the time they were ready to release it, the public mood had shifted so far that it sounded like satire. Comment sections flamed. "We're committed to diversity, but you just tried to have a black grandma arrested for being in a boardroom. Okay, you dumped toxic waste in black neighborhoods, and now you're shocked they had receipts. Pay Ms. Johnson. Clean up your mess. Put workers on your board." Internally, some middle managers tried to reassure their teams. "Try to focus on your work," they said in meetings over video calls. "We don't know the full story. Let the process play out." But the process had already jumped from courtrooms to living rooms. The story had faces now. A janitor, A granddaughter holding a shaking phone. Laid-off workers stepping to microphones. Meanwhile, the board huddled with lawyers. SEC investigators requested documents. The EPA scheduled site visits. Shareholders demanded explanations. And in the middle of it all, the CEO, still technically in charge, found his calendar filling with red slashes as public appearances were cancelled and internal calls doubled. 2 days after the boardroom confrontation, he stepped down pending the outcome of ongoing investigations. The press release was a small paragraph. The news coverage was not. One by one, other executives followed. Some negotiated exit packages. Some resigned in disgrace. A few went quiet, disappearing behind gated communities and expensive lawyers. But the damage, once contained in spreadsheets and legal briefs, had already leaked into the world. The viral clip of Levin walking into the boardroom played on late-night shows and news commentary segments. People set it to music. They slowed it down, zoomed in on the moment she sat in the CEO's chair. They remixed her calm words over protest footage, over images of factory lines. Hashtags trended. #Janitor Boardroom. #Who owns the work. #Invisible no more. In a video from a different city, a cafeteria worker at another corporation filmed herself looking into the camera, saying, "You'll better start treating us better. You never know who's got the paperwork." Some people scoffed. "She got lucky," they said. "Not everyone has a magical clause." Others said, "You're missing the point." For Brightline, the point was unavoidable. They faced lawsuits from shareholders accusing them of mismanagement for failing to recognize the risk. They faced class actions from communities harmed by their plants. They faced regulatory fines, consent decrees, possible criminal charges. Their stock never climbed back to where it had been. Their glossy offices grew quiet. But amid the wreckage, something else began to take shape. A proposal emerged from a coalition of regulators, community groups, and a surprisingly large number of employees to restructure the company under new leadership, with a significant stake held in trust for the affected neighborhoods and frontline workers. At the center of that proposal was a name, the Johnson Community Trust. When they asked her to chair it, Levin laughed until her eyes watered. "Me?" she said. "I still mop floors." "Exactly," said Alvarez. "That's who should be guiding this. Someone who's seen every level of the building." They offered her vengeance. They offered it in polite ways, through lawyers' suggestions and whispered comments, never using the word, but clearly picturing it. "We can push for maximum sentences," Alvarez said one day. "Tone neutral, simply laying out options. We can pursue not just financial penalties but criminal charges where warranted. We can recommend barring some of these executives from ever serving in leadership positions again." In the echo chamber of online rage, people were less restrained. "Lock them up," someone tweeted. "Forget fines. Make them scrub floors for the rest of their lives. Take every cent they have and give it to the workers," another wrote. "Put Ms. Johnson in charge of everything," someone else posted, half joking, half serious. Sitting in her modest living room, TV off, quiet humming from the old refrigerator in the kitchen, Levin read those words on her phone and felt something tight in her chest. Anger, yes. It had been with her for decades, a slow-burning coal. But something else too. Weariness. The bone-deep kind. When the cameras came, one last time, to ask for a comment, they expected a fiery speech. They found her on the steps of the old community church instead, hands folded over her knees, watching children play in the yard. "Ms. Johnson," a reporter said, microphone angled. "The CEO has been charged. Several board members are facing civil and potential criminal penalties. The company has agreed in principle to a massive settlement and to cede considerable control to the Johnson Community Trust. You've achieved what many would call a stunning victory. What do you want to say to the people who are celebrating you as a hero? And what do you want to say to the people who harmed your community?" She looked at the microphone, then at the camera beyond it, and then past that, as if she could see through the lens into living rooms and phone screens. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. "I get why folks are angry," she said. "I've been angry a long time, too. When you watch your loved ones get sick from air that should have been clean, When you see your neighbors lose homes because a company decided their profit mattered more than anyone's stability, anger is natural. She paused. But if all we do is flip the script and start dreaming of how we can make the powerful suffer the way we suffered, she continued, we don't really change the story. We just switch who's on top and who's on the bottom. She folded her hands more tightly. What I want is something harder, she said. I want accountability that doesn't forget anyone's humanity. I want people who made decisions that hurt others to stand in front of those they harmed, look them in the eye, and say, I did this. I am sorry. And here is how I will spend what's left of my life trying to repair it. The reporter blinked. Do you think that's realistic? He asked. She smiled sadly. Realistic is a word folks use when they are scared to imagine better, she said. I've seen janitors know more about a company's soul than its executives do. I've seen people dismissed as unskilled keep whole systems running. I've seen clauses written as afterthoughts become the lever that moves giants. She looked directly into the camera now. Dignity, she said, isn't a perk you earn with a corner office. It's not a bonus. It's not stock options. It's what you owe every person whose life touches yours, whether they're your shareholders, your customers, or the folks who empty your trash when you've gone home. Her voice trembled for the first time. We got here, she said softly, because some people decided that the titles on their business cards made them more important than the names on our uniforms. That bias let them ignore warnings, avoid hard questions, and tell themselves they were the good guys while their choices broke lives. She inhaled slowly, held it, let it out. If you're watching this and you're in a position of power, she went on, I'm not asking you to feel guilty. I'm asking you to be honest. About who you don't see. About whose voice gets cut off in meetings. About whether the people cleaning your office can pay their rent while you're discussing your bonus. She lifted her gaze to the sky for a moment, then back to the lens. And if you're on the other side, she said, feeling small, feeling dismissed, I want you to remember, your worth is not measured in how fancy your job sounds. Don't let anyone convince you that you're less than they are because you hold a broom instead of a briefcase. The work you do, the way you carry yourself, the care you show, even when nobody says thank you, that is power. It may not make the news, but it keeps the world from falling apart. Another reporter stepped forward. Do you forgive them? She asked. Levin thought of the CEO's face when he realized he wasn't in control, of the board members looking anywhere but at her, of the nights she'd gone home with aching joints and a heavier heart. I'm working on it, she said honestly. Forgiveness is a long walk. Accountability is the first step. We're just now taking it. Her words traveled. People quoted them. Some rolled their eyes. Some wrote them on sticky notes for their desks. In boardrooms across the country, a few executives who saw the clip shifted uncomfortably, remembering the way they'd spoken to their own staff that morning. A few sent emails to their facilities teams, asking to meet. Some meant it. Some didn't. Change was slow, but it had begun. 8 months later, the building on the corner of Franklin and West 23rd looked the same from the outside. Glass still caught the sun, reflecting a sky that pretended nothing beneath it ever changed. The revolving doors still whooshed gently as people walked through. The lobby still smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. But if you look closer, differences glinted like small coins in unexpected places. The logo at the front desk had a new line beneath the bright line name, in smaller, famed letters, operated in partnership with the Johnson Community Trust. The security guards had new badges that described them as safety and support officers. On the wall where generic stock photos of smiling employees once hung, there was a display of portraits taken by a local artist, the night shift supervisor, a cafeteria worker, a software engineer, a receptionist, a janitor, each with their name in large letters, their job title in smaller ones below, and next to each portrait, a quote about what dignity meant to them. In the lobby, a group of college students in lanyards clustered around a sign that read Community Tech Apprenticeship, Orientation Today. Their stipends were paid from the trust funded by the settlement. Upstairs, change ran deeper. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had been renovated. Not in grand ways. The table was the same, though it bore a slightly dull patch where years of elbows had worn its polish. But the seating chart had changed. Two chairs were marked worker representative. One was filled by a woman from the assembly line, hair still smelling faintly of machine oil. The other by a man from the call center, calloused fingers tapping at a tablet full of notes from his colleagues. Another chair bore a small plaque, Community Trust Liaison. Sometimes Alvarez sat there, legal pad ready. Sometimes another member of the trust took the seat. At the head of the table, the CEO's chair was now labeled simply Meeting Chair, rotating. Different people chaired meetings depending on the agenda. It did strange things for the dynamics, having finance sitting in the middle one week and operations the next. The first time a janitor sat in that chair for a meeting about facility upgrades, someone snapped a picture. It made the company's internal newsletter with the caption, "Perspective Shift." It wasn't perfect. There were still old guard managers who rolled their eyes at the changes, muttering about optics and overcorrection. There were still employees on the lower floors who felt the shift only in small ways. A slightly better benefits package, a new training program, a manager who suddenly became more polite now that they were afraid of being filmed. There were still shareholders grumbling about reduced dividends. But the plant emissions had dropped. The creek behind the housing project ran a little clearer, thanks to new treatment systems funded by the trust. At the community center, job retraining workshops were full, not just for Brightline's former workers, but for neighbors from other industries too. And in a small office on the 20th floor, overlooking a slice of the city, sat a woman in a navy blazer with an ID badge that read Director, Johnson Community Trust Liaison, Brightline Division. Her name, Natasha Johnson. Sometimes, when she had a particularly rough meeting, Tasha would lean back in her chair, close her eyes, and remember the feeling of her phone shaking in her hand that day in the boardroom 8 months ago. She still had the video saved offline, even though the internet had copied it a million times. For her, the most important frame wasn't the one where her grandmother sat in the CEO's chair. It was the one just before that, when the janitor with a mop bucket looked at a roomful of powerful people as if she had nothing to prove. Tasha tried to carry that same steadiness into every conversation now, whether it was arguing for more funding for community scholarships or telling a senior manager that no, they couldn't quietly delay a promised safety upgrade until the next quarter. Downstairs, on the 9th floor, the janitorial closet still smelled like bleach and lemon. A mop leaned in the corner. The car was parked neatly beside it. Livin didn't push it every night anymore. Her doctor had finally convinced her that her knees deserved more rest. She'd cut back her hours, stepping officially into her role with the trust, attending meetings, sitting on panels, reviewing proposals. But whenever she came into the building, which she did often, her feet still took her toward that closet. She'd open the door, inhale, run a hand along the handle of the mop like a greeting. "Miss it?" James asked once, catching her there. Some days, she admitted. Work was simple. Mess. Clean. Done. He chuckled. "Nothing simple about the mess up on 42, he said. "Ain't that the truth?" she replied. One afternoon, after a long meeting in which lawyers and community members had debated the right way to structure a new profit-sharing plan, she found herself alone in the refurbished boardroom. The chairs were empty. The city glowed beyond the windows. Her reflection, lined and solid, looked back at her from the glass. She walked slowly to the head of the table. The chair there, today marked for another department's representative, sat waiting. She didn't sit. Instead, she laid a hand on its back, feeling the grain of the wood under her fingers. It wasn't about the chair, she knew. It never had been. Power wasn't in the furniture. Power was in whose stories got told, whose names were on the contracts, who believed they had the right to ask questions in the first place. She remembered her husband's laughter, his excitement. She imagined telling him about all this. "We finally made them listen," she whispered, barely audible. She left the room, letting the door swing slowly shut behind her. In the hallway, she passed a young man in a maintenance uniform. He looked nervous, glancing at the floor, then at her. "Ms. Johnson," he ventured. She smiled. "Yes, baby." He swallowed. "I work nights. Cleaning." I wanted to say, "It means a lot, what you did. For all of us." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Keep doing your work well," she said. And don't ever think that means you have to keep quiet if you see something wrong. He nodded, eyes bright. She walked away, footsteps steady on the carpet. In homes around the city, in other towns far away, people still watch her old videos sometimes. Teachers played it in classrooms when they talked about labor and power and ethics. Pastors quoted her in sermons. Union organizers referenced her when they rallied. The roar of the internet, always hungry for the next outrage, had moved on to other scandals. But the clip remained, tucked into the collective memory like that small clause tucked into a contract. A reminder that anyone can be underestimated, that unseen work holds up worlds, that a mop in one hand doesn't mean there isn't a lever in the other. And now, somewhere, maybe in a boardroom, maybe in a break room, maybe on a couch surrounded by bills, you're here, at the end of this story. You've walked through that confrontation, felt the weight of that folder, watched the faces around that table twist with indignation and then fear. You've seen what happens when the person everyone overlooks steps into the center of the room and calmly tells the truth. So let me ask you something. If someone walked into your space tomorrow, the office you work in, the shop you manage, the classroom you teach, the hospital where you clock in, and turn on a camera, what would the people watching see in the way you treat the person cleaning up after you? Would they see dignity or dismissal, respect or reflexes you've never questioned? In the quiet moments when no one is filming, you're the one writing the clauses in the story of your own character. What are you putting in there? Maybe today's the day to look around, to see the people whose names you don't know but whose work you rely on, and start a different kind of reversal. Not one that shuts anything down, but one that opens something up. You don't need a viral clip or a courtroom filing to do that. You just need to decide. Next time you walk into a room, are you going to be the person who laughs at the janitor, or the one who makes sure she already has a seat at the table? The answer's yours. What will you do with it?